Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. The Vienna game is my favourite opening for white, and I play it when I can. This is part 3 of the series, The Venomous Vienna, showing how devastating the opening can be, at least at the beginner intermediate level. This was a 30-minute rapid game on chess.com, and both my opponent and myself are rated in the mid 1100s. Please enjoy! So let's start first with the review. So this is what the chess.com algorithm thinks, 83.1% accuracy for a fairly short game though. But as you can see, I make a fairly catastrophic blunder near the beginning of the game, but manage to crawl back when the opponent makes some blunders of their own. And one of the advantages of the Vienna game is that because it's often unfamiliar territory for the opponent, this sort of pattern where even if you do something wrong, you may well have an opportunity to get back into the game. Now let's go have a look at the analysis. Right, so I played white, obviously, in this game. So the Vienna, e4, e5, knight c3. The opponent played the Max Lange defense, which is a symmetrical knight to c6. I developed bishop to c4, opponent bishop c5. And in this setup, there is an opportunity to immediately punish the opponent for bringing their bishop out with queen to g4 with the attack on the g7 square, which is now undefended by the opponent. That's what I did. And the opponent here played g6, which is actually a reasonably good move, though you would note the advantage is already to white. Now, the important part of this game, is that in this position, you have to move the queen. Now, what happens when you don't move the queen is that if the opponent develops their d pawn either to d6 or to d5, there is now a discovered check on the queen, which is of course quite a forcing move. So in this position, you must move the queen. Now I basically just forgot what the correct line was, and as you will see, I blundered a move here. There are basically sort of three moves that can be done: g3, f3, and potentially back to d1. So basically bringing the queen all the way back. Now, I actually sort of analyze this to some depth with Stockfish. And depending on the depth, Stockfish fluctuates between the three on what it thinks is the best move. Generally, it would suggest either g3 or f3 is the best move. Now, I think f3 is probably the most human-looking move, given that now there is a sort of mate in one threat in that location. But both g3 or very conservative all the way back to d1 apparently are still okay, and white is still ahead with those moves. Now, what I did play was a very erroneous d3. And as I mentioned before, I'm now subject to a discovered attack on the queen, and the pawn also now attacks the bishop. And for the most part, it is now unavoidable that that bishop is lost. Must move the queen out of the way, otherwise you would lose the queen. Opponent captures the bishop, and here I'm a bit despondent given that, you know, I clearly just made a silly blunder in an opening that I actually really enjoy. Again, so at this point I thought, look, let's just put more and more threats. You know, the more threats I put out, the greater likelihood the opponent might make a mistake. So bishop to g5, attack on the queen, supported by and my bishop is supported by the queen. The opponent decides to go all out, you know, capturing the f2 pawn with their bishop. And here I had a bit of a quandary. So I thought that if I took with the king, you know, this threat still exists. and the opponent will be forced to do something. However, I saw that no, they could probably just push the pawn, and I'll be forced to move the bishop anyway. And with the king, sitting in the f2 square, no, I lose castling rights, and also it seems just very, very exposed. So at the end, so in the end, I just lost my nerve, and I captured back with the queen. No, giving up the other bishop as well. My position isn't any worse because now their queen is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I did see that I had now some tricky potential moves with the knight, so I definitely did have some counterplay left, and I maintain castling rights, and potentially I could long castle fairly easily. So knight f3, attack on the queen, queen forced to retreat. However, now there's another developing move for another knight with another attack on the queen. So knight d5, queen forced to move a second time. Here I thought it would be a good idea to bolster that knight with a second pawn. Opponent brings out their bishop, which was not unexpected, but no, this is completely okay for me at the moment, and I can bring an extra attacker and defender for that knight, and lining the rook up against that queen with long castles. And here I saw a potential very sneaky attack. So just like how I had a discovered attack, a forcing a discovered attack on my queen, moving the knight, out of the way with check would mean that I could win that queen if the opponent didn't see that move, and they didn't. So check. With the discovered attack on the queen, king forced to move one way or another, but doesn't matter. That queen is lost. Opponent plays valiantly. I bring the knight back to block the bishop's attack along that diagonal. Opponent pushes forward their knight. I thought that was probably not a good move, given I had that attack, and this is all good with me with the diagonal attacking the rook. And I was very surprised when the opponent seemed not to have recognized that rook was hanging. And worse, that rook would lead to check, which would mean that other rook was lost as well. So captured the rook. Opponent here realized their sort of really monumental blunder there. They are completely lost, and they resigned. So the Vienna game really does lead to some venomous positions that are potentially very advantageous for white, even when you stuff up, as was the case in this game. Well, thank you to the opponent. GG. This game followed the Max Lange defense of the Vienna game, where the opponent playing black developed their knight and then bishop in a symmetrical fashion. This allows the move Queen g4, immediately attacking the undefended pawn on g7. In this game, the opponent responded by pushing their pawn forward to g6, and the correct response for white is retreating the queen to either f3, which gives a mate in one threat, or to g3. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.